All right. I'm so excited to welcome all of you today to this conversation with my friend Tracy MacDonald. Tracy and I met at a fellow coach's conference. It was a writing retreat and it was October of 2020. I stood up. We all declared our missions of who we were here helping in the world and what we were passionate about. And I met Tracy MacDonald at this conference. So I want to bring Tracy on and just say hi to Tracy, let her tell you where she lives and what she does and who she is. And then I want to talk about that meeting time. So Tracy, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's always so much fun to speak with you, Sherry. And I remember that day very clearly when we met, and it's been such a blessing
Yeah.
to know you these past few years. So
Yeah.
I'm currently in a hotel in Atlanta, Georgia, part of my transitory life. We are based, my husband and I, in West Africa, in the country of Gabon, where there was a military coup last year. So my son, who's 12, is now here in the States at boarding school. So I just dropped him off after Labor Day, and I'll be flying back overseas in a couple of weeks.
Mm. And what a life that has been. I know you've gone through a lot of transitions, a lot of change, especially this last year, and especially kids growing, a son who feels like is probably growing up faster than you want him to, given these situations. I want to touch back on kind of how our moment came together of realizing we were connected in this way of being women who help support our very hardworking spouses who really lead a life of service in what they do. And we are sitting in the back seat a lot of times, just kind of helping them, supporting them, but at the same time, we're doing so much that we don't always give ourselves credit for. But I stood up at that conference, I remember, and said, I really am here for that woman, especially military spouses, service spouses, those women who give so much because I'm so tired right now, and I think there needs to be a book written about this, of all the sacrifice that we do as women and I remember, do you wanna tell tell everyone kind of what happened from there?
Sure. It was like you were such a beacon in that room, and I felt like you were speaking straight to me. And I had flown there from Honduras, where we were based in the Foreign Service with the embassy there. And I was jet lagged, but just excited to be in a space where I could be with kindred spirits and alone with my thoughts. And I beelined over to you and I said, I need you to write that book. I am so tired. You are speaking to me.
Yeah, and I remember we both were crying and
Yes.
hugging each other, and I was shaking really because I was like, "Me write a book?" Because this was something for me that I had never really thought of until I met Sarah Cannell, is who we're speaking of, the coach who said, "Do you have something inside you that someone else needs to hear?" And just that day was so pivotal because I have to tell you, Tracy, I know I've told you this just when we've talked, when it got really hard and difficult to write this book, and it took me really 3 years to do this. I can't believe it took me that long, but it became something that I would always reflect on that moment. And I would think of you. I'm like, do it for Tracy, do it for
Oh,
Tracy. And that honestly got me through of like those moments where I felt so, because writing, it does feel very alone sometimes. And you don't know, am I writing the stuff that really it's on my heart, but is it on someone else's? And it meant a lot, really, because you became that anchor for me, whether you knew it or not, to finish the book, like get this book done. So that was why I really wanted to bring you on and just talk about this and have a conversation, because you are that supporting spouse that has given up a lot of things, but yet gained a lot of things along the way. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about your background, because you are quite an accomplished woman, and I want
Thank
people to
you.
hear what your background is, because what you're doing now too.
Thank you. Well, and I'm honored to have been that person for you. And I'm so excited that your words and your thoughts and that you're putting all of that out into the world with your book, Sherry.
Yeah.
So I started out in banking and didn't know anything about transactions, but it was my job out of college. And I got exposure to the anti-money laundering fraud software, and it really intrigued me. And I went on to live overseas and give presentations on this fraud software to banks. And then when 9/11 happened, Secret Service came and spoke to me because I was head of the Bank of America portfolio where the hijackers had used Bank of America credit cards to purchase flight lessons on some small aircraft. So we sat down, we looked at the time and date stamps so they could go get the footage from the merchants that were in the credit card transactions. And I went on to apply and become an agent. And it was 10% women when I joined, and I became a federal agent and went right to the Atlanta field office.
Mm.
And I loved it, but with all the protection and the criminal cases, it was a very jostling time. It was in 2004. And then I met my husband. As life happens, the playing field changes. And I really had to take the skills that I had learned in both banking and Secret Service, use my clearance, use my corporate training skills, and figure out what do these value add ingredients, what remarkable dish do they make now for me in my life? And I went into the Department of Defense and ended up teaching counterterrorism, using finance, shutting down the threats through financial means. And I loved it. And I actually, I was with the consulting group, went out on my own, started my own company. And 6 months later, the ball dropped that we were leaving America. It was now time for my husband and his career to go overseas. We would be diplomats and start our trajectory. And we've now done that for 17 years. And it's been wonderful. And it's been really hard and isolating and a constant reinventing of who I am, who are my friends, my house, the school for my child, all of that, that anyone in this kind of a lifestyle like you and military spouses have to adapt to.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, incredible story, and of just everything. And I don't even think I knew those few things that you mentioned about being involved. I knew it was money, financial stuff, but I had no idea the connection between being involved in Bank of America and all of that with 9/11. That's incredible with that. And when you stepped into that role of being that supporting spouse, kind of pulling away from what was on your heart, how did you balance personal growth? Like, what has been helpful for you balancing personal growth, that community, and kind of, especially for women like us who do support our spouses and go overseas and give up, if you will, that kind of thing. Speak to that a little bit. I'm wondering.
Sure, sure. I'm very passionate about this question. As you know, I had worked from high school until I had a child at 40, and then we moved to Africa, rural Africa, and my husband went off to work, and I was in the house with the baby and not at work for the first time really ever, other than, a couple months on maternity leave. And I had to dig deep and figure out, who am I? Who am I outside of work? And over the years, I think there are several nuggets of wisdom that have really come to help me. One is factor yourself into the equation. So often I was so concerned with what the child needed and what my spouse needed. And I felt like I always had to get dinner on the table, even if I was unpacking 86 boxes that afternoon and we couldn't find the kitchen counter. There were all these expectations that were in my own head. My husband never ever said to me he expected dinner to be on the table, but I was raised that way. And I felt like I had to do what my mother had done. And then there was all this guilt when I couldn't do that. So letting go of the guilt and just understanding you are doing the best that you can. You add value by waking up and just being there every day. Um, Factoring yourself into the equation, not glorifying the busy, making sure that even if it's for half an hour, stop and make sure that you have met your own needs for the day. I would go to bed resentful because I had done everything for everyone else, including the dog. And I hadn't even sat down to read a chapter of a book or to drink tea and journal or take a nature walk and do the things that really ground me. And once I understood, I couldn't flake out on myself. I had to keep those appointments like they were doctor's appointments. And, I wouldn't stand up a friend for coffee. And so I thought, why do I do that to myself? And once I started factoring myself into the equation, that made all the difference. And then figuring out within wearing all these hats, what is it that really lights me up? And finding those activities, as esoteric as they may be, because I was in countries that maybe didn't have a yoga studio or anything. So I got really into birding with a camera and, just figuring out what can I do in this space and carving out those activities that felt good to me. Reaching out across the miles is huge. We've spoken about this a lot, that sense of community, which changes. I have certain friends that I call for comfort. I have certain friends that I call like you when I need inspiration and masterminding and leveling up. And, someone who's going to tell me to pull up my bootstraps instead of just saying, oh, it's going to be okay. And two, one of the hardest things in finding community is reaching out to someone when you really need it that understands the lifestyle. A lot of my friends from home, as sweet and comforting as they are, think that I have a really glamorous lifestyle. And I tell them it's a lot more grit than glamour. Yes, occasionally we go to a red carpet event, or I get to go to something where we're all dressed up and, it feels diplomatic, but most of the time I am trying to navigate potholes on dirt roads and running errands that take 4 hours that in America would take an hour and a half. So reaching out to someone who gets that it's not all that you might think it would be in this lifestyle.
Yeah, I'm so glad you made so many great points in that. And the loneliness, that's the common challenge, I think, for so many, like you mentioned, of that life of transition of always. And I think there's a clash of that for women in midlife anyway, that when our kids are kind of springboarding and starting to go out on their own and do their own thing, and your spouse is good into his career, and then there's the now what with that. And I love what you brought in was like finding those different groups of people who help nourish those areas that you need, the growth area versus I just need someone to hang with and remind of the fun memories, the comfort versus the ones that, it can be you have different groups of friends to do all of that stuff. And what have you found being so kind of far away? Because I know you've gotten very creative about forming your sense of community, especially like really honestly going through COVID and everything being so far away in a different country had to be just a different experience for you too with all of that. How did you find ways to cope in the loneliness of being so far away when maybe it's not just the Starbucks down the street, right?
Right. Yeah. There's rarely, in these developing countries where we happen to live, because my husband's a high threat agent, we go to high threat countries. So usually they're not terribly developed.
Mhm.
And I can't just run down the street and hang out at a cafe sometimes. But really, for a lot of people, I'm sure out of COVID came the online presence of gathering, and Zoom, of course, and online platforms were huge in helping me not to feel lonely. We called it coffee and cocktails because usually it was cocktail hour for me and it was coffee time for my friends in the States, depending on the big time differences.
Yeah.
So, FaceTiming and spending some time online with friends, but also doing yoga videos online. I got really into podcasts, which was new for me. I'm a visual learner. I hadn't listened to a lot of podcasts before, but listening to thought leaders, especially women. So I felt almost like I was part of a conversation, whether I was cooking in my kitchen or unpacking boxes, as we do every couple of years, just so that you feel, I guess maybe the old fashioned feeling for some people was like having the TV on in the background, but really engaging my mind in a conversation that transported me to somewhere better.
Mhm.
Thought leaders who had conversations about things that were uplifting generally, your Brene Brown or Mel Robbins, or
Yeah.
just topics that I felt like I was missing by having women in my living room to talk to.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. It is one of those things where you find kind of what you need. Can you share what are, a couple of things that you do to help yourself kind of stay grounded in your everyday life? Is there routine? Is there structure? I imagine sometimes that's hard traveling, but when you do get in your zone, what do you find helps you the most?
I am a huge journaler, and
Mhm.
definitely my routine is to wake up, try to find coffee. If there's no coffee, tea works too. And I sit down with my journal and really start with gratitude. And that has been a practice I really try to hold on to, especially when I feel like maybe I'm starting to spiral a little bit. Like, instead of thinking life is happening for me, life is happening to me, it's easy to start sinking down. But once I start thinking, okay, we are safe, we are healthy, we are so lucky, I turn on the Olympics and I see the amazing feats of these young people that have 40 seconds to achieve something they've spent a lifetime training for. And I think, there's just so much to be grateful for,
Mhm.
and so that really grounds me. Getting outside, I'm fortunate that usually there's a space, if it's not safe in my neighborhood, like in Honduras, then I could at least go to the embassy and walk around the compound. Just making sure that I make time to connect with nature in some way is hugely grounding and spiritual for me.
Mhm.
And then scheduling things to look forward to. I make sure that every couple of months, even if it's a weekend trip or a date night with my husband going somewhere special, we just carve out that time because I think just it's fun to have the anticipation, and then also it kind of pulls me out of my present space if I need something to kind of perk me up.
Yeah. I hear so much intentionality. And I think that's where, you've lived a life full of intention and being able to put that into play sometimes always isn't really that easy, right? Especially with just being so unpredictable, but it's even honestly what we have to do even more so is ground into that. What do we really want? Who do we want to be? What do we really want? And what will help us feel safe, just like you mentioned too, and that gratitude, I love that practice. So you had a chance to read an early version or at least the advanced version of the It's Your Turn book. I'm curious if you wanna share as we close out, kind of the thoughts that came when you started reading the book.
Well, I cried through it because everything that you had to say was so true and so touching. And in a way, for me, some of it was bittersweet because the lessons that you bring to light are so important. And I think I just wish that I had realized them when I was younger. I think I spent a lot of time suffering in silence sometimes, and I really didn't need to. And you do such a good job of, telling women it's okay and this is your turn and you've gone and you've done all this for everyone else. And now it is your turn. And the story of your husband handing you that flag at his retirement is like something out of a film. That moment is just so uplifting and gracious and just full of love. I really want to meet your husband one day. I just love that story. And I think too, with the prompts and I love how you have at the end of every chapter given things to think about. And through that, just being able to create a sense of community. I would love to speak at some point to other women who've read the book. And if I can't start a book club of my own because I'm so transitory, and most of the women at my post right now have really little children, and they're down in the trenches. They're barely staying above water, and so there aren't a lot of other women in my phase of life. So I just appreciate the wisdom and the encouragement and all the light that your book brings for women. And I can't wait to discuss it.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, Tracy. Stay tuned for a book club coming near you. And we'll get
Great.
part of the book portal is that there is already being created a book club guide there that will be chocked full of some resources and things to kind of put into play there, along with there'll be a mini quick start course on the It's Your Turn program that I've created to be in the book portal too. So that's just a sneak peek for others to kind of think about too. But definitely community is really important to me too. I think living that life of the military lifestyle service, we're all transient, being able to jump in, feel connected, and not leaving anyone behind in that whole kind of community is really important. It pains me when I hear other spouses say, how lonely they are, how hard it is to get out or find their tribe. And it is one of those, I think we have to just keep trying because we do find those people maybe in a lifetime, but it's so good. So thank you for spending the time. Is there anything else you want to share? Just kind of parting words and then before we close?
I just think that you're a life raft. This book, you're out there like tossing out all the ropes, like swim in. I've got you. I've got you. You're rescuing these sweet souls who need community. So
Oh, well,
thank
we
you.
all need rescue. Thank you. We all do. So it's not just me, it's throwing lifelines to one another. So thank you. I love that. Such a sweet analogy. Thank you, Tracy. Is there a place anyone can connect with you that would be a good way to connect? If they want to connect with you and chat with you a
I
little
would
bit more.
Sure, I would love that. I can get messages and comments on my blog, and I write a lot about our foreign service lifestyle, the hardships and the high points. And that's carpediemcreative.com.
Okay, we'll go ahead and put that kind of in the notes below. And then also are you on LinkedIn as well?
I am, yes,
Okay,
yes,
so
as
that would be,
Tracy Knight MacDonald, and I'm so happy to field any questions, or if anyone's moving to a foreign country and they just feel like they need a lifeline, they are welcome to reach out to me.
oh, I love that. Thank you for offering that too. So, all right, thanks everybody. Until next
Thank
time,
you. Thank you,
take good
Sherry.
care.